important. There was Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. Had George Bush Sr. as his CIA director, had some people who he could trust and who could trust him.
After leaving the White House, Ford replied to a letter from a former Air Force intelligence officer who researched UFOs. During my public career in Congress as Vice President and President, I made various requests for information on UFOs. The official authorities always denied the UFO allegations.
As President, Ford said nothing on this topic. So you can either think someone got to him or he just lost interest, but I think more likely he decided it wasn't politically prudent to discuss this matter.
Coming up, some presidents put all politics aside once they had their own UFO encounters. While there are some documents connecting UFOs in the White House and a few reports that presidents may have seen them, there's only one public admission. President Jimmy Carter was the first commander-in-chief to admit to seeing a UFO.
Carter was known as UFO president because he actually talked about his sighting. A UFO group had contacted him, wrote him a letter and said, could you fill out our sighting report? Jimmy Carter filled out the sighting report, and the rest is history.
Well, Carter himself said the incident happened in October of 1969 when he was down in Leary, Georgia, speaking at a Lions Club. He spoke very strongly about it. And one thing I think it also is very impressive to the public is the fact that Carter was a state legislator here in Georgia when he saw the sighting, and he went on record about it and spoke of it quite publicly. And even becoming governor and then later becoming president, he's never waffled on it. He's always been quite upfront about it. Yes, I saw something, and no, it was not. I could not identify it.
I don't make fun of people who say they've seen unidentified objects in the sky.
He'll always say that he can associate with people who have had the experience, that he would never laugh at anybody who's had a UFO sighting because he's experienced it himself.
Carter's UFO report gives a vivid account of what he saw that night.
I never have tried to identify what I saw. It was, a light in the western sky that was very unique. I never seen it before. So there were about 20 of us who saw it.
Carter said the object he saw was had firm edges. It was circular. It seemed self-luminous. It was about 1,000 yards away, and it retreated, and then it came forward, and then it left. Basically, when you talk about UFOs, people look at you strangely, and for that reason, I think a lot of people would not be willing to be like Carter and go on the line and actually fill out a report.
And he's never disavowed the content of his report, which tells me that Jimmy Carter, just as honest as a man as you'll ever find in or out of government, has left that bit of legacy to be savored by future UFO researchers who can point to it as a milestone in the fact that the government does know more than it has been telling about the subject. And this was enough inspiration for Jimmy to try to funnel out some of that knowledge.
While running for the presidency, Carter made campaign promises that he would release all he could about UFOs once he took office.
Well, no, but I would, make information that we have about those sightings available to the public and identify.
And how did they try to hold Jimmy Carter to his promise? They wrote letters to him as soon as he got in office saying, Jimmy, you're now where you can fulfill your promise, please do so.
As many as 9,000 UFO-related letters from citizens reached the White House during Carter's term.
Naturally, he didn't answer it all himself, hardly any of it, but there were many people, some of them were interested in the follow-up to that 1976 promise, and others were just interested in telling their own little experience where they might have seen something that they wanted to go on record.
But some researchers suggest other reasons why Carter may not have been able to deliver on his campaign promise.
The CIA comes in and briefs the president on the most important intelligence stuff. And the person who briefed Jimmy Carter on the intelligence matters was George Bush Sr., the CIA director. Jimmy Carter asked for the UFO file. The story was that George Bush said, you don't have a need to know. This works on a need to know, and curiosity on the part of the president isn't sufficient need to know.
To those who claim that George Bush was briefing Carter on UFOs, I think the burden of the proof would be on them. I mean, there were other much more likely subjects for them to be talking about.
Regardless, President Carter did release UFO-related documents during his administration. The UFO community considers it the golden years.
Half of all the UFO documents, there's thousands of UFO documents that have been released under the Freedom of Information Act request over the last 30 or 40 years. Over half of them were released under 4 years of Jimmy Carter.
These newly declassified documents were sourced from numerous agencies. They contain information about many UFO sightings and the military responses. Access to the declassified material continues to bolster UFO research.
We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow. And let there be no misunderstanding. We are going to begin to act.
There are reports that Ronald Reagan had 2 UFO experiences prior to serving as president. The story of his first sighting reached the public through the memoirs of actress Lucille Ball. She recalled that Reagan and wife Nancy arrived late to a Hollywood party.
And she stated that when Mr. Reagan and Nancy arrived at the party, they were all excited. They told everybody about this sighting, that this thing they had seen it coming down the coast. They had watched this whole thing.
Ronald Reagan was very interested in the topic of UFOs, privately, very much so. And indeed, has been said to have seen one while flying on an aircraft as governor of California. Apparently a very interesting sighting.
Allegedly, Reagan saw a white light zigzagging alongside his aircraft. He stepped into the cockpit and told the pilot to follow it.
His pilot had 30,000 hours as a pilot, which is an incredible number. And the whole plane load of them saw this thing.
They reportedly chased the mysterious light for several minutes until it shot skyward out of sight. Could these alleged sightings have fueled Reagan's repeated references to UFOs and alien life during his presidency? February 11th, 1988, in a speech called Remarks at the Annual Conservative Political Action Conference Dinner, Reagan said,
"Our unshakable, root-deep, all-encompassing skepticism about the capital city's answer to the UFO, that bizarre, ever-tottering but ever-flickering saucer in the sky called the prevailing Washington wisdom."
A presidential speech is a very complex thing. It has many drafts. It has people who proof every word as to whether every word is accurate in their figures, facts. It's a very long and involved process. There's up to 25 agencies who have to sign off, State Department. Everybody gets to put their little 2 cents in, what they want taken out. So I started checking the speeches, and I went through every Ronald Reagan speech that had this alien invasion.
Reagan asked his speechwriters to address the alien UFO subject.
He believed that if we were invaded by people from another planet, that the world would come together, the world would unite. He called it his fantasy.
One of the more compelling exchanges was between speechwriter Rhett Dawson, who sought to keep the fantasy out of Reagan's speeches and away from the commander-in-chief. The discussion preceded President Reagan's address to the 1987 UN General Assembly.
There's a memo that comes from the speechwriter that says, "Mr. Reagan, this is your speech, and go over it and let me know." And he noticed that this particular item about the alien invasion had been removed.
The president responded with a handwritten demand scribbled on the memo.
And on the bottom, in Reagan's handwriting, Reagan says, "There's too much anti-Soviet stuff in here. I want you to back away from this. And, oh, by the way, could you put my fantasy back in, how the world would unite if faced with creatures from another planet?" And he used the word creatures.
Clearly grasping the president's determination, Dawson rewrote the speech, and during the 42nd General Assembly of the United Nations on September 21st, 1987, Reagan said,
"Our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
When we return, are some presidents in the know about UFO files while others are not?
And the reason is simple. You're more apt to see a UFO than you are his plane.
UFO researchers insist that George Herbert Bush is the key to present-day UFO knowledge.
George Bush Sr., I think, is one of the key presidents when it comes to ufology. He's a very important president because he has always been believed by a lot of researchers to be a guy who knows what's going on. He was former CIA director under President Ford. He was vice president under Ronald Reagan for 8 years, would have gotten briefings on many issues, including UFOs. He was trusted by the military. He was trusted mostly by the intelligence community. In fact, now they've actually named